Welcome to KC Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice, telling the stories of Kansas City nonprofits and the people behind them. KC Cares is the intersection of the business and the nonprofit community, making Kansas City a better place to live, work, and play. This KC Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation, www.kauffman.org. The Kansas City region is a vibrant community, growing and expanding in many, many ways. However, there is always more room to grow and to expand the metro area into a more planful way of pulling in key players from across many sectors. Imagining Kansas City has a greater future for all of us. Well, that's what KC Rising is all about and much more. Creating that shared vision for regional prosperity. Align, amplify, accelerate. So what does that really mean? Well, to help us uncover all things KC Rising are two of the power players with this monumental effort who have been in since the beginning. Eric Morgenstern, who co-chairs communications, and Neil Sharma, who is co-chair of KC Rising. And we welcome you both. You both do many, many other things than just these titles. So maybe a good jumping off place for us is to talk a little bit about what your real life is and how you got involved with this thing called KC Rising. Neil, you want to start us off?
Thank you, Ruth. And honored to be here as part of a conversation with two amazing people who've had many conversations. So I feel very lucky to just be a part. My history is as an entrepreneur here in Kansas City. I'm a hometown kid. I went to high school here and graduated, and I never thought when I graduated I'd come back home to Kansas City, but in grad school came back to the University of Kansas, and out of the University of Kansas started a business called DEG. And DEG was a full service digital marketing agency that we grew to a good size, several hundred people, and about $130 million in total revenue over about 22 years. Sold that business just recently. And so I think, now pursuing a number of different entrepreneurial, philanthropic, and civic pursuits. It is the hometown, I think, it is Kansas City that has been an essential ingredient in all of those activities. It is something that I feel was critical to our success at our business and really lays the groundwork for all of the entrepreneurial endeavors that I've had and hope to have in the future. It is, in my view, the most entrepreneurial city in the country, and I hope to contribute to keep it that way, not just through what we're doing at KC Rising, but also through, what a serial entrepreneur might do, creating more businesses. So that's kind of my gig most of the time.
Well, thank you. Hey, have I got a kid who should talk to you? Wants to be that entrepreneur where you are. Eric, you and I have known each other a long time, but I want our audience to really know and understand what you do and how you came to this.
Ruth, once again, thanks for the opportunity to be on the program. I always appreciate the ability to share some of the things that we've learned with other leaders in the not-for-profit community, because together we're stronger. I am an unabashed KC Civic booster, always have been. Grew up here, little 4-year escape to the University of Kansas, back to Kansas City. I've been here ever since. Worked in corporate, worked a little in government, and finally started my own firm, Morningstar Communications, with my wife, Shani, back in 1997, parentheses, before cell phones were smart, 2 years after the internet got going. The communications industry, shall we say, has transformed. So along the way, I served on the KC Chamber Board. I've served a number of organizations, all designed to help our community. And I just have to interject here that I believe our community is on a once every 50-year renaissance. Think back in the 70s. In the 70s, the Truman Sports Complex came online. In the 70s, KCI was born. There was so much excitement happening back then. Here we are in the 2020s. We have our new terminal coming online. We've got the NFL draft with the world's focus on us. And now we've got the World Cup in 2026. The eyeballs of the world are paying more attention to our region than ever before. And KC is on the rise. And that is the genesis for KC Rising. While we are doing really good as a region, we can always do better. And candidly, in a few areas, we really need to do better. Service for the underserved, transit, education, healthcare. We've got a number of issues in our region that need to be addressed. So I got involved in KC Rising before it was KC Rising, when Brookings had done a report after, remember the Great Recession, 09 and 10, that said our region wasn't growing as fast as some of our peers. And it really upset a bunch of people. And so we sat down and figured out, okay, what we're doing is good, but we need to do something else, something accretive. And after much conversation by literally hundreds of smart, caring executives who want to see the region grow, and I see the region, and you said it, Ruth, it's economic prosperity for all. Everyone that's a Royals and Chiefs fan, the 2.5 million of us, that's what Rising is all about. And it's working. We've been at this 8 years. I've had the privilege of serving as our communications co-chair that entire time. And it takes a long time to get a not-for-profit up and running and starting to make a difference. We can now count a number of successes along the way. So I am so proud to be a part of KC Rising and am delighted to have a chance to share our story.
Well, I love that description. So welcome to the Renaissance, a few centuries later, to pull a musical theater pun. For those of you who don't know it, go see Something is Rotten. At any rate,
she finds these quotes.
It sounds so exciting. Okay, for the average person, Neil, how would you really describe what your nonprofit is doing?
Well, it's funny because I hope to not cloud it more and rather clarify, because what's interesting about KC Rising is that it's actually not a nonprofit organization in its own right at all. What it is a collaboration, a consortium, a movement, if you will, of a number of nonprofits and government organizations and businesses and health and human services organizations and educational institutions all coming together. Because the truth of the matter is every corner of the public square in Kansas City is trying to make Kansas City better. And I think that their desire to do so should not be constrained in any regard. But what many of your listeners, I'm sure, will recognize is that all throughout our awesome town, everybody trying to move Kansas City forward is trying to move Kansas City forward almost independently sometimes. It feels like, somebody up in North Kansas City might be trying to, for example, have a real world learning initiative for their students in North Kansas City. And somebody in Southern Johnson County might be attempting to do the same kind of thing, or out in Lee Summit, it's attempting the same kind of thing. And many of us who have worked in civic circles in Kansas City always wonder, well, boy, wouldn't it be better if all of these groups sort of found a way, in any kind of way, to collaborate and work together and pursue their common ends together in some fashion? And wouldn't we achieve more when we do that? And what I think people don't fully appreciate is that whenever Kansas City has to come together to try to overcome a challenge or pursue an opportunity, we have intrinsic barriers that make it much more difficult for us to do so in a way that other cities do not. If other cities face what Brookings Institute had said years ago that Eric mentioned, they have the ability to come together with a little bit more ease because there isn't, for example, two state legislatures. There isn't two governors that might have their own agendas. There isn't a long history that state line presents, meaning not just a history in colloquial terms, but truly a history. A war was fought over. They don't have dozens of municipalities, 16 counties to have to navigate in order to try to accomplish something. And so when we wonder in Kansas City why it's so hard for us to connect the dots, we forget often that we are presented with some barriers that just aren't there for cities like Austin or Indianapolis or Nashville or Denver or Cincinnati a little bit or Columbus or whatever. And so for Kansas City, we have those. And so what KC Rising is hoping to do, getting to the root of your question, is overcome those intrinsic barriers and align the efforts of awesome organizations, awesome not-for-profit organizations that are already moving down a particular direction, align them under an articulation of a shared vision, which we have articulated under what we call the pillars of prosperity. And by that alignment, powerful force that is alignment, accelerate what any one of them could do on their own and amplify the impact any one of them on their own could have. And that way work together to get further faster than any one of us could accomplish on our own. And so what's unique about that is the four major civic organizations that we have always been regional in their construct came together to recognize that they have distinct mandates, but not disconnected ones. And those four are the KC ADC, the KC Chamber, the Mid-America Regional Council, and the Civic Council. So many of your listeners are probably familiar with all four of those. And they understand that all four of them have a unique place in our community. But what they did was all four of them came together and said, we need a collaborative to make sure that at least around some agenda we can pursue. And through the process of doing it, my last comment on it, through the process of doing that, we've created something I think truly different, truly unique. Because every time Kansas City has had to come together to pursue an opportunity or overcome a challenge, we've had to spin up, a whole group of people and a whole bunch of energy, often the same people each time, to try to get a bi-state research tax passed or Union Station going or the airport or something. And we had to be we were reactive to what those opportunities were, or reactive to what the challenges are. In the process of what we're attempting to do at KC Rising, we are being proactive in what we want to pursue for the next year, for the next half decade, for the next decade, and picking our priorities ahead of time for us to all go after together.
Ruth, let me give you two very specific examples of needs that we identified, have developed a program, a collaborative approach to address it, and it's already bearing fruit. So the first one is connecting people with means with entrepreneurs who need money. Now, the rap on Kansas City for years has been, we're not good for investing in our early stage entrepreneurs. Well, we and others, Chamber, Civic Council, took that on and dove into why is that true? Because we have a lot of means in our town, and we certainly have a ton of entrepreneurs. Why are we not connecting the dots? And what we learned, again, a lot of folks, not me or Neil on this one,
sure,
is that the biggest barrier for people of means to invest in Kansas City startups is ignorance. They don't know how to assess it. They don't know how to invest. They don't know how to get out. They feel like if they were asked to do it, they'd never see their money again. Well, that's not a sustainable model. So poof, Darcy Howe, one of our leading volunteers, came up with the solution, which is called the KC Rise fund. And in investment terms, it is referred to as a sidecar fund. And what that means is you've got all of these people who want to fuel Kansas City entrepreneurs who invested in this fund, and then professional money managers are figuring out what to do with their money and the money that's already there in the KC Rise Fund. And so it rides along. Today, there are 1,100 jobs that have been created through the KC Rise Fund with an average salary of $90,000 apiece. Now, that's in its first, I want to say 5 years, maybe. Let's do a little geometric work on that and say, in 5 more years, how big is that going to be? In 5 more years, how big is that going to be? See, KC Rising has some core principles for our operating: long-term, metrics-based, business-led. Politicians come and go. We love them. But these are things that require 10 and 20-year horizons. So the second specific program that we have put in place that I am particularly proud of is what's called real world learning. And it is an initiative led by Kauffman to answer the question, how can I show that a student knows how to do blank? Collaboration, research, all of those real world skills. Well, as our friends at Kauffman Foundation would say, for the first time ever, we've got industry and higher ed, academia working close together. And we've all heard things like stackable credentials and certificates. All of this ties into the real world learning because this is the ultimate win-win. If we can get an employee elevated, then that business doesn't have to recruit someone from outside. We can feed our own employee growth. We can provide opportunities for our own folks. The businesses get a steady flow of talented worker, ready folks. And it grows. Okay, real world learning has now been implemented. Neil, I'm not up to speed. How many school districts and how many businesses, but everyone is taking off on it because it is the solution to, well, a bachelor's degree doesn't get you ready for my job at ABC. This is filling the gap. I am so excited about what that's going to do, particularly for folks that are stuck in a more lower income world. They can elevate, they can get up, they get promoted. Now they can buy a house. Now they can start a retirement fund. And pretty soon, in 10, 20 years, we've created wealth for a family. So between getting money to investors and getting people educated, there's over 300,000 people in our region that have some college but don't have a degree. What can we just layer on top of that to get them up and running and being better revenue generators? So I say these examples because these are not easy programs to pull together. The people, the mechanics, the heritage, but we are all about long-term substantive change for the better, for economic opportunity for all. And while I'm going, one more thing. We've seen, Ruth, in so many cities where the economic opportunities are not for all. For those that have means, it's been a wonderful boom, but we're leaving people behind in a lot of other communities. We are fervently committed to not let that happen in Kansas City. Look at all the work that's being done, riverfront, transportation, east side of Troost, all of the inclusion efforts. We will not let that happen. So economic prosperity for all.
We're talking with Eric Morgenstern and Neil Sharma. It's KC Rising. Let's talk quickly about the 7 pillars. You have planful organization. Neil, can you outline those pillars and just briefly describe what they mean?
So while Neil is calling them up, let me frame their purpose. Imagine if we could get as many organizations, not-for-profits, government entities, for-profit businesses, to all steer towards the same fundamental levers that will propel Kansas City forward. Wouldn't that be cool? That's why we created the pillars. And when I say we, I'm talking about nearly 500 100 people, 2 years of input, community groups. This is reflective of the largest chorus of anything I've ever been involved in. And these pillars have already been embraced by more than a dozen of those organizations. And Ruth, we are barely starting to roll them out. And Neil is the grandfather of them. So there you go, buddy.
Well, right. At 45, I hope grandfather is the.
I was going to say you're a very young grandfather. There you go.
Well, and Eric did, as per usual, an excellent job of describing, so much about what KC Rising is attempting to do. But I think the fundamental insight around the pillars themselves was the idea that if we looked to align all of these corners of the public square, inclusive of the not-for-profit organizations and the educational institutions and health and human services and government, that the unique capacity of business to be an arbiter of a lot of these elements, especially as it relates to economic prosperity, it stands alone. And I think business has an important role to play in not just funding and supporting financially, but also being kind of an even ground to bring folks together. And there's a lot of thought I have around that for maybe another podcast of the unique role business could play. But and so what we asked ourselves were, what kinds of areas, or another way to put it is, what dimensions of success do we wish to bring people together and that business has a unique position to lead on? There are many, by the way, issues that business can't lead on or shouldn't lead on. And so we tried to drive those things to be the galvanizing kind of agenda that KC Rising could work to align all these different constituencies. And so we landed on 7, and as Eric mentioned, it was literally thousands of hours of conversation. Civic work takes a long time, and it's a grind, but it's a necessary grind, because we wanted to be able to build the most inclusive picture possible, so that it is not just shared prosperity for a few, but it is shared prosperity for all. So what did that shared vision of prosperity look like? So the first pillar is inclusion itself. And we mentioned inclusion on the predicate in this instance, in the way that we describe it in the pillar, about looking at how do we ensure diverse perspectives are represented in the leadership of our companies and organizations in Kansas City. How do we ensure that we're elevating folks intentionally to those roles? And in the process of doing so, how do we reduce the compensation gaps that exist among races and exist among genders? And also recognizing that income is only one piece of the equation. As business folks know, wealth generation is another piece of the equation. And so how in the process of creating an inclusive environment and inclusive prosperity do we help improve the wealth gaps that exist between races in our community and genders in our community, because it exists in both those dimensions as well. The next was education, which we talked about a little bit at great length in terms of stackable credentials and real world learning. But what we talked about in the pillar is that idea that we already are pioneers in real world learning. So our desire, our goal, the proactive target that we've had for ourselves, that 100% of our high school students by 2030 will have experienced one real world learning experience that gives them a market value asset by the time that they graduate high school, is articulated in the language, in the thematic language. But the idea that we look at learning and throughout the age of agility, right, throughout someone's life, because the economy demands that kind of agility, is articulated in that pillar as well. The next is what we call connectivity, and that was our way of, when we started, it really had a lot to do with connecting the infrastructure, not only streetcar and highways, but as the pandemic ensued during the sort of drafting of these pillars, we realized that connectivity also means internet connectivity, like digital connectivity. So much of our interactions in our work now and our healthcare and our education is occurring as a result of digital connectivity as much as physical connectivity. So connectivity really addresses that. I'm going to bridge now for the remainder, but the neighborhoods is the next. And neighborhoods is really focused on the idea of creating distinct environments all throughout this Kansas City's community of communities that is a great place not just to live, but to also work and to play. And oftentimes we have built Kansas City in a model that says, this is a great place to live, but you don't work here. And this is a great place to work, but you don't play here. So can we create neighborhoods that are excellent places to live, work, and play, by the way, that people can afford? And that's a key piece that's been a draw of Kansas City and retaining our affordability that has made us such an appealing place for people to migrate to. Next is one that we call enterprise. And that's the idea of how do we ensure that our large successful businesses can play a stewardship role with our smaller businesses, which have been the way that the economic flywheel of so many metros have occurred. Silicon Valley is the best example we could go into great detail about. But how do we create that environment of stewardship? How do we create that environment of investment that Eric talked about with the KC Rise Fund? How do we create that environment of capital flows? One of the things we've identified is how much lack of access many small and diverse and micro businesses have to banking. So that's what really enterprise is focused on. Industry is our penultimate one. Industry is one that is more indicative of a strategy, really. But the idea is so we can focus on the areas where we have economic superiority in the global context. One of the first we identified was our architecture, engineering, design companies, where Kansas City is head and shoulders above the world. Can we find ways to invest in those places so that we extend our lead? We're looking at advanced manufacturing now. And then lately, we started to look at what are the bets we want to make now as a community for industries that are going to be super important 10 years from now. So we actually get a head start proactively and build that industry capability here in the city. So called regional economic clusters, industry clusters. And then last but certainly not least is culture. And the idea that if we're going to define Kansas City's success, we want to define Kansas City's success in a uniquely Kansas City way. All of these things lead to that, but probably none more than culture. And in our culture, we really speak not only to our unique arts community, which is profoundly punching above its weight in comparison to cities of comparable size, and frankly, in comparison to cities that are larger, but also our sports community as well, which has been a big part of Kansas City culture. And one person came up to me and said, our articulation of culture in our pillars for the first time points out to both the arts community and the sports communities that it is not a zero-sum game, that actually we can make that pie of what sort of makes life worth living in our city bigger for everybody engaged and involved, and strengthen our community's character in the process. So those are our 7 pillars. That's what we're trying to align folks around. And again, as we can connect the dots there, we can accelerate the impacts that folks have and make them even more profound, more big.
Believe it or not, we are. Go ahead,
We are
Eric.
happy to come and speak to a group if they're interested in learning more. I would ask everyone to go to the KC Rising website. We list a number of ways to get involved. If you're in your day job, if you've got an opportunity to host a teacher for a while, let's do an apprenticeship. Can you get a student there for some additional real world learnings? Kids love working at not-for-profits. We can help facilitate all of those things. So come visit us at KC Rising and recognize that KC Rising is a celebration of the entire community as opposed to just our small little organization.
We've just touched the tip of the iceberg, a good iceberg, let's put it that way, on KC Rising. So I hope you all will come back and we'll do a check-in and we'll see where this fabulous concept and boots on the ground is going. So thank you both for your time, and go check it out, audience. be part of the Renaissance.
Ruth, thanks for spreading the word so well, so often to so many.
KCRising.com. Thank you so much, Ruth. Appreciate being part of this.
Thank you for listening to Casey Cares, Kansas City's nonprofit voice. We're produced by Charitable Communications. This Casey Cares segment is brought to you by the Ewing Marion Kaufman Foundation, www.kaufman.org. If you'd like to be a guest on Casey Cares or underwriting opportunity to support what we're doing, visit our website, kccaresonline.org, and spread the love. You'll find us on Facebook and Twitter at Casey Cares Radio and on Instagram at Casey Cares Online. Catch us on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. at ESPN 1510 and 94.5 FM. Thank you for listening to Casey Cares.